The armored carriage smelled like iron and old velvet, and Brenna Zavala was fairly certain she'd just sworn an oath that might get her killed. "Repeat the 11th provision," said the Guan elder councilman, his voice echoing in the castle courtyard as dawn broke pink and fragile over the city skyline. Brenna cleared her throat, one hand still raised, the other clutching the witness book against her ribs. "I shall maintain a distance of no less than 3 feet from His Majesty at all times, and under no circumstance shall I make physical contact with the sovereign, on penalty of—" "That will suffice." The councilman's face was gray with exhaustion. Behind him, servants were loading the last trunk onto the supply wagon. "You understand the role of sun witness, Miss Zavala. 40 nights. You observe, you record, you certify that His Majesty Orthane Edevane travels only between sunset and sunrise, in accordance with the Sun Accord of 1847. You are the Accord's eyes. You are proof that vampire sovereignty respects human daylight hours." "I understand." "Then board. They leave in 10 minutes. The carriage was larger than she'd expected, reinforced with steel plating that made it look more like a military transport than a royal conveyance. Inside, the benches were upholstered in deep burgundy, and heavy curtains blocked every window. A single oil lamp swung from a brass hook, casting restless shadows. Brenna climbed in, dragging her travel case and the witness book, and took the rear-facing seat. Protocol dictated she sit opposite the king, never beside him. 3 feet minimum distance. No physical contact. 40 nights of this, winding through 6 provinces, settling border disputes and hearing petitions, all while she documented every sunset departure and sunrise arrival to prove the vampire king wasn't breaking the one law that kept the Accord from collapsing into war. She'd been chosen because she was expendable. A clerk in the public records office, no family of importance, literate and methodical and thoroughly unremarkable. If something went wrong on this circuit, an ambush, a political incident, a breach of protocol, her loss wouldn't ripple. The door opened. Orthane Edevane stepped into the carriage, and Brenna forgot how to breathe. She'd seen him once before, at a distance during a public audience. Even then she'd noticed the unnatural stillness, the way he moved like water poured slowly from a cup. Up close, in the lamplight, he was something else entirely. White hair fell past his shoulders, straight and fine as silk thread. His skin was porcelain pale, flawless, inhuman. His eyes were pale gray, almost silver, and when they flicked toward her she felt the weight of them like a hand pressed to her sternum. He wore black, head to toe. A long coat over a high-collared shirt, leather gloves, boots that made no sound against the carriage floor. He settled onto the opposite bench with perfect economy of movement, folded his hands, and regarded her in silence. Brenna swallowed. "Your Majesty." A slight incline of his head, not quite a nod. "I'm Brenna Zavala, your sun witness for the progress. I know who you are." His voice was low, measured, with an accent she couldn't place. Old European, maybe, though he'd ruled this territory for 160 years, and the record said he'd been ancient even then. I'll do my best to stay out of your way," Brenna said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I know this is an inconvenience. The Accord requires it." He leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting to the shuttered window. "I have no objection to your presence, Miss Zavala." The driver's whistle sounded. The carriage lurched forward, wheels crunching over gravel, and Brenna braced herself against the armrest. Orthane didn't move, didn't sway. He might as well have been carved from marble. They rolled out through the palace gates as the first hard edge of sunlight cut across the towers behind them. Brenna opened the witness book, uncapped her pen, and made the first entry. Day 1. Departure at 6:47 a.m., full sunrise observed. His Majesty boarded carriage at 6:40 a.m., prior to direct solar exposure. Witness confirms no daylight travel. She blotted the ink carefully and looked up. Orthane was watching her. "Is something wrong, Your Majesty?" "You write quickly." "It's my job." "Indeed." He turned his attention back to the window, though the curtains remained closed. "We'll travel 9 hours today. There's water in the compartment under your seat. Food, if you require it." "Thank you." Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Outside, the city gave way to highway, the carriage swaying gently as they picked up speed. Brenna tried to read the briefing documents she'd been given: land disputes in the 2nd province, a petition from a merchant guild in the 4th, but her eyes kept dragging back to the figure across from her. He barely blinked, barely breathed as far as she could tell. Once, his fingers twitched, the only movement he'd made in half an hour, and she found herself staring at the way his gloves creased over his knuckles. "You're permitted to speak, Miss Zavala." She flinched. "I didn't want to disturb you. I've been undisturbed for decades. Conversation is no hardship." Brenna set the papers aside. "All right, then may I ask a question?" "You may." "Why do you do this?" "The progress. You could send representatives. The accord only requires that you don't travel by day. It doesn't mandate these circuits." Orthane's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. "Because law is not real unless it is seen. A king who remains in his palace is a rumor. A throne that does not move through its own lands becomes a story people stop believing. You think they'd rebel? I think humans require proof that power is consistent. Vampires ruled in shadow for centuries, Miss Zavala. The Sun Accord brought us into the light, so to speak. These progresses prove we abide by it, that we are not monsters who break our word." Brenna studied him. "Do you believe that? That you're not monsters?" His mouth curved, just slightly, not quite a smile. "I believe that words like monster depend entirely on who is holding the pen." She thought about that as the hours unspooled. They stopped once, briefly, so the horses could be watered. Orthane remained inside. Brenna stepped out, stretching her legs in the brittle autumn sunlight while guards in dark uniforms kept a perimeter. One of them, a stern-faced woman with a scar across her temple, handed Brenna a wrapped sandwich and a canteen. "Eat quickly," the guard said. "We don't linger." "Why not?" "Daylight stops are vulnerable. The longer we're still, the easier a target we make." Brenna ate standing up, watching the horizon. They were deep into farmland now, fields stripped bare after harvest, the road cutting straight through empty country. It felt exposed, too open. She was almost relieved when the whistle blew and they climbed back into the carriage. Orthane hadn't moved. He sat exactly as she'd left him, hands folded, eyes half closed. "Do you sleep?" Brenna asked as the carriage jolted forward. "Not as you do." "What does that mean?" "It means I rest, but I remain aware. Sleep, for vampires, is a form of meditation. We do not dream." "That sounds lonely." He opened his eyes fully, fixing her with that unsettling silver gaze. "You assume dreaming is company. It's something. A mind talking to itself. Better than silence." "You dislike silence, Miss Zavala?" "I dislike emptiness," Brenna said. "Silence is fine, but 40 nights in a box with nothing but my own thoughts sounds like a prison sentence." "Then speak," Orthane said. "I will listen." It was an odd sort of permission, formal and almost courtly, but Brenna found herself talking. About the records office, the tedium of filing tax documents and birth certificates. About her tiny apartment in the city's clerk quarter, the neighbor who played violin at 3 a.m, the bookshop on the corner where she spent half her paycheck. Small things, human things. Orthane listened without interrupting, his gaze steady and unreadable. When she finally ran out of words, the sun was low, the light leaking around the curtain edges turning amber. "You have a gift for observation," Orthane said. "It's just details. Details are what make truth real, a valuable skill for a sun witness." Brenna felt herself flush. "Thank you." The carriage began to slow. Outside, voices called back and forth, the guards coordinating. Orthane straightened slightly, the first real movement he'd made in hours. "We're stopping for the night?" "First in," he said. "You'll have a room. I will not. I'll remain in the carriage or walk the grounds. Protocol." "Right. Can't risk you being seen indoors after sunset. People might think you're feeding." His gaze sharpened. "I do not feed on the unwilling, Miss Zavala. I didn't mean... The Accord's blood provisions are clear, donated blood certified and sealed. I have not tasted a living human in 60 years. There was no anger in his voice, but the air felt colder. Brenna swallowed. "I apologize. I wasn't accusing you." Orthane inclined his head, the tension easing. Understood. But you should know most of the rumors you've heard about my kind are either exaggerated or obsolete. We adapt, Miss Zavala. Survival demands it. The carriage stopped. Brenna gathered her things, tucked the witness book under her arm, and climbed out into the dusk. The inn was small and weathered, perched at a crossroads with a stable out back and a hand-painted sign that read, "The Waystone." Inside, the common room smelled like stew and wood smoke. The innkeeper, a stout man with flour on his apron, took one look at Brenna's travel papers and paled. "Son witness," he breathed. "The King's Circuit. We weren't expecting." "You were notified 3 weeks ago," said the scarred guard, stepping in behind Brenna. "1 room, 1 night. Meals for the witness, no questions." Of course. The innkeeper fumbled with a key. "Upstairs, first door, clean linens. I'll bring supper up." Brenna thanked him and climbed the narrow staircase. The room was plain but tidy. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window overlooking the road. She set the witness book on the desk, opened it to the second page, and made her entry. Day 1. Arrival at Waystone Inn, 7:34 p.m., full darkness. His Majesty exited Carriage at 7:40 p.m., no daylight exposure. Witness confirms compliance. She blotted the page and sank onto the bed, exhaustion rolling over her like a wave. 1 day down. 39 to go. By the 5th night, Brenna had developed a routine. She woke before dawn, dressed quickly, and took her place in the carriage while the world was still dark. Orthane would board a few minutes before sunrise, silent and punctual. They would travel through the day, stopping once or twice, and she would write, read, or increasingly talk. He was easier to speak with than she'd expected. He asked questions, remembered details, offered observations that were occasionally dry and surprisingly funny. When she'd mentioned the violin-playing neighbor, he'd said, "I once had a servant who played the lute at all hours. I reassigned him to the border garrison. It's amazing how quickly one's appreciation for music returns when it's no longer compulsory." Brenna had laughed, startled, and he'd looked almost pleased. But there were boundaries. He never spoke of his own past, deflected questions about vampire politics, and maintained that 3-foot distance with rigid precision. When she'd shifted on the bench once, her knee accidentally brushing his, he'd gone completely still and she'd jerked back, stammering apologies. "It was an accident," he'd said quietly. "You need not apologize." "The rule." "I am aware of the rule, Miss Zavala." But he'd moved fractionally farther into his corner, and the air had stayed tense for an hour. On the 8th night, they reached the 2nd province, a river region where the land turned marshy and the roads deteriorated into mud tracks. The carriage bogged down twice, and by the time they stopped at a cold, cheerless inn surrounded by reeds, Brenna was soaked from a sudden downpour and shaking with exhaustion. Orthane watched her stumble out of the carriage, his expression unreadable. "You're unwell." "Just cold." Her teeth chattered. "I'll be fine once I'm inside." "You should have said something. There are blankets in the storage compartment." "I didn't want to." She swayed, and his hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. The contact lasted half a second. Then he released her and stepped back as though burned. Brenna stared at him. "You touched me." "An error. It will not happen again." "You were keeping me from falling into the mud." "Nevertheless." His jaw was tight. "I violated protocol. I'm not going to report you for catching me." "You should." He turned away, his coat snapping in the wind. "It's your duty." Brenna opened her mouth to argue, but he was already walking toward the tree line, vanishing into the shadows. The scarred guard, her name was Dorina, Brenna had learned appeared at her side. "Inside, witness. You'll catch your death." "He thinks I'm going to write him up for stopping me from face-planting." Dorina's expression was carefully neutral. "The rules exist for a reason. The rules are ridiculous." "The rules," Dorina said, "are what keep people from accusing him of influencing you. Now move." Brenna moved. But that night, in the drafty room with rain hammering the roof, she opened the witness book and stared at the blank line under day 8. She could write it. His Majesty made physical contact with the witness during disembarkation. A single sentence that would trigger an investigation, penalties, possibly a formal rebuke. She closed the book and left the page blank. The next morning, Orthane was silent. He boarded at the usual time, took his seat, and did not speak for the first 3 hours of travel. Brenna tried twice to start a conversation. He answered in monosyllables and returned to staring at the shuttered window. Finally, she snapped, "Are you going to sulk for the next 32 nights?" His gaze cut to her, sharp as broken glass. "I do not sulk. You're doing a remarkable impression of it. I am ensuring," he said icily, "that I do not repeat yesterday's error." "It wasn't an error. It was a reflex. You saw someone about to fall and you reacted. That's called being decent. Decency is irrelevant. The law is clear. The law is paranoid." Brenna leaned forward, forgetting the distance rule. "You think I don't understand? They're terrified you'll manipulate me, that you'll use vampire tricks, compulsion, seduction, whatever to make me falsify the record. So they built in all these rules to keep us separate. But you can't compel me, can you?" A long silence. Then, "No. And you haven't tried to seduce me." His mouth twitched. "I was not aware it was expected." "It's not." Brenna sat back, exasperated. "My point is, the rules are designed to stop something that isn't happening. You've been nothing but professional. So stop punishing yourself for a half-second of normal human vampire instinct." Orthane studied her. "You did not record the incident." "No. You should have. I recorded what mattered. Sunrise, sunset, compliance with the accord. The rest is noise." Something shifted in his expression, a tiny crack in the porcelain mask. "You are either remarkably principled or remarkably foolish, Miss Zavala. Can't I be both?" This time he did smile, small, fleeting, but real. "Perhaps." The conversation resumed. They talked about the river province, its trade politics, the tension between the fishing guilds and the agricultural cooperatives. Orthane explained the history with the patience of someone who'd watched it unfold firsthand, and Brenna took notes, fascinated despite herself. Somewhere around midday, as the carriage rocked over uneven road, she felt her eyelids drooping. She'd slept poorly the night before, the rain keeping her awake, and the steady motion was hypnotic. She blinked hard, forced herself upright. "You should rest," Orthane said. "I'm fine. You're exhausted. Sleep, Miss Zavala. I will wake you when we stop." "I can't. What if something happens? What if I need to record? Then I will wake you. You are no use to anyone if you collapse from fatigue." It made sense. Too much sense. Brenna's head was buzzing with tiredness, and the bench, for all its stiffness, felt impossibly inviting. She shifted, trying to find a comfortable angle against the corner. The carriage hit a rut. She jolted sideways, and suddenly her cheek was pressed against something solid and cool, Orthane's shoulder. She jerked upright, panic flooding her veins. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Be still." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You're about to fall off the bench entirely. But the rule, I will not tell if you do not." Brenna stared up at him. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, amusement, maybe, or resignation. He shifted slightly, angling his shoulder so it made a better pillow. "Sleep, Miss Zavala." She should have argued, should have moved back to her corner, maintained the distance. But she was so tired and he was so steady, and before she could think better of it, she let her head rest against his shoulder and closed her eyes. The last thing she heard was the creak of the carriage wheels and the faint, barely there sound of his breath. Brenna woke to stillness. The carriage had stopped, and the light around the curtain edges was deep gold, late afternoon, maybe early evening. She blinked, disoriented, and realized she was still leaning against Orthane. She bolted upright. "Oh God, how long was I?" "6 hours." Her stomach dropped. "6? You let me sleep on you for 6 hours? You needed rest. You should have woken me. You should have moved. You should have—" She pressed her hands to her face, mortified. "This is a violation, a huge violation. If anyone finds out, no one will find out. Darina could have looked in, one of the drivers, anyone. The curtains were closed, and I ensured we were not disturbed." Brenna lowered her hands, staring at him. He looked exactly as he had when she'd fallen asleep upright, composed, hands folded, as though he'd sat like a statue for 6 hours rather than shift and risk waking her. You didn't move at all, did you? It was not difficult. You're a vampire, King. You could have, I don't know, compelled me awake, moved me to the other bench, anything. I could have. He met her gaze evenly. I chose not to. Why? For the first time since she'd met him, Orthane hesitated. His gloved fingers twitched, the only sign of uncertainty. Because you were tired, and because the rules, as you correctly observed, are paranoid and occasionally absurd, and because... He stopped. Because it has been a very long time since anyone trusted me enough to fall asleep in my presence. His voice was quiet, almost distant. It felt wrong to betray that. Brenna's throat tightened. She thought about the way people looked at him with fear, with suspicion, with the wary deference owed to something dangerous. She thought about the rules designed to keep him isolated, the protocol that treated him like a loaded weapon. "Thank you," she said. He inclined his head. "You are welcome." The door opened. Darina leaned in, her scarred face impassive. "Sunset in 10 minutes, Your Majesty. Shall we proceed to the manor?" "Yes." Orthane rose in one fluid motion and stepped out into the fading light. Brenna followed, her legs stiff from sitting, and found herself in front of a sprawling stone manor house surrounded by vineyards. "Where are we?" "Third Province," Darina said. "Lord Saverin's estate. You're dining with the household tonight. His Majesty has a dispute to mediate." The evening was a blur of introductions and formal dinners. Lord Saverin was a florid, nervous man who kept glancing at Brenna as though she might suddenly denounce him. His wife was warmer, asking polite questions about the journey, and their daughter, a girl of maybe 20, with dark curls and sharp eyes, watched Orthane with barely concealed fascination. Brenna picked at her food and tried not to think about the 6 hours she'd spent asleep on the Vampire King's shoulder. After dinner, Orthane held court in the manor's great hall, hearing petitions from local landholders. Brenna sat to the side, witness book open, recording the proceedings. Most of it was tedious boundary disputes, water rights, a complaint about tariffs, but Orthane handled it all with calm efficiency, asking pointed questions and delivering rulings that seemed to satisfy everyone. At midnight, the last petitioner left. Orthane dismissed the household, and Brenna found herself alone with him in the cavernous, firelit hall. "You're good at this," she said. He glanced at her. "At what?" "Ruling, listening, making people feel heard. It is the least I can do. They tolerate my existence. I owe them competent governance. They don't just tolerate you. That girl Saverin's daughter, she was staring at you like you were a romance novel come to life." Orthane's expression turned faintly pained. "I am aware. It is uncomfortable." "Why?" "Because it is based on fantasy. They see the white hair, the old-world manners, and they imagine something tragic and poetic. They do not see the reality." "Which is?" He turned to face her fully, and for a moment the mask slipped. She saw exhaustion, the weight of decades, the loneliness of being something no one else could understand. "That I'm a man trying very hard not to be a monster. And some days, Miss Zavala, the margin is thinner than I would like." Brenna's breath caught. "You're not a monster. You've known me for 8 days. And in those 8 days, you've been patient, honest, and kind. You sat still for 6 hours so I could sleep. Monsters don't do that." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his silver eyes. Then he turned away. "Your room is prepared. You should rest." It was a dismissal, but a gentle one. Brenna rose, clutching the witness book, and paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I think the reality is better than the fantasy." She didn't wait for a response. By the 15th night, they'd fallen into a rhythm. They talked more than they were silent, debating everything from provincial tax policy to the ethics of immortality. Orthane was well-read, sharp-witted, and surprisingly willing to be challenged. Brenna discovered she could make him laugh rare, brief, but genuine, and the sound of it never failed to startle her. They traveled through the fourth province, a mountainous region where the roads wound through pine forests and the air turned cold. Brenna started bringing a blanket into the carriage, wrapping herself against the chill. Orthane, immune to temperature, watched with something that might have been amusement. "You could sit closer," he said one afternoon. "Body heat would help." "That's against the rules." "The rules have already been bent. 6 hours, remember?" Brenna felt her face heat. That was an accident. And yet it happened, and the world did not end. "You're trying to corrupt my professional integrity. I am trying to keep you from freezing." He shifted slightly, making space on the bench. "Sit, Miss Zavala. I will not tell." She hesitated. Then, feeling reckless and cold, she moved to sit beside him, still a foot away, not quite touching, but close enough to feel the odd, staticky energy that surrounded him. "Better?" he asked. "Better." They stayed like that for the rest of the day. Brenna read aloud from a book of poetry she'd brought, and Orthane listened in silence, his eyes half closed. When she stumbled over a particularly dense stanza, he corrected her pronunciation, and she swatted his arm without thinking. He froze. So did she. "I just hit the Vampire King," Brenna said, lightly. "Still. Shall I have you executed?" She looked up at him, alarmed, and saw the faint curve of his mouth. "You're joking." "I am capable of humor, Miss Zavala. I'm never sure." "Good. It keeps you on edge." She laughed, and the tension dissolved, but she was acutely aware of how close they were, the way his shoulder was almost brushing hers, the way his attention felt like a physical thing. On the 20th night, they stopped at an inn near the border of the 5th province. It was larger than the others, a proper coaching house with a courtyard and multiple floors. Brenna was given a room on the 2nd story, overlooking the stables. She couldn't sleep. The bed was comfortable, the room was quiet, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept thinking about Orthane, the way he'd looked at her that afternoon when she'd asked about his maker. He'd deflected the question, but not before she'd seen the flash of pain in his eyes. Finally, she gave up, threw on her coat, and went downstairs. The courtyard was empty except for a single figure standing near the well, Orthane, his white hair gleaming in the moonlight, his coat collar turned up against the wind. Brenna approached quietly. "Can't meditate?" He turned. "Miss Zavala, you should be resting. So should you, metaphorically." A faint smile. "I do not require rest as you do. But you still need it. Darina told me. Vampires who don't meditate regularly go—" She hesitated. "Mad," Orthane finished. "Yes, it is a risk, but I am hardly in danger after a single restless night. What's keeping you up?" He looked away toward the dark line of trees beyond the inn. "We cross into the 5th province tomorrow, Lord Garvin's territory. I read the briefing. He's contested the accord before. 3 times, and each time he has skirted the edge of open defiance. He believes vampires should not be bound by human law, that the accord is a weakness. And you disagree. I believe the accord is the only reason we are not at war." Orthane's voice was hard. "Garvin is old, powerful, and reckless. If he moves against the accord, others will follow, and the humans will respond. We will burn, Miss Zavala, and we will deserve it." Brenna stepped closer. "You really believe that? That you deserve it?" "I believe that power without restraint is tyranny. The accord restrains us. If we cast it off, we become what humans have always feared. And then, yes, we would deserve what comes." She studied his profile, the sharp lines of his face, the way the moonlight made him look carved from ice. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" "Someone colder, more arrogant, less human." He turned to face her, and the distance between them was suddenly very small. "I have been alive for 247 years, Miss Zavala. I have been a monster, a king, a diplomat, and a relic. But I was human once. I remember it. And I have spent 2 centuries trying to hold on to the parts that mattered." Brenna's heart was pounding. "Is it working?" "I do not know. But when I am near you, it feels—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I should not say this. Say it anyway. It feels easier, as though the weight is less, as though I am not carrying it alone. She couldn't breathe. His eyes were locked on hers, silver and depthless, and she could see the struggle in them, duty against want, protocol against feeling. "Orthane," she whispered. "Do not." His voice was rough. "Do not make this harder than it is." "Make what harder?" "Keeping my distance, honoring the rules. You are here to witness, not to—" He broke off, turning sharply away. "Go inside, Miss Zavala, please." Brenna wanted to argue, to close the space between them, to say all the things building in her chest, but his shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched, and she knew pushing now would only hurt him. "Good night, Your Majesty," she said softly. She went inside and did not look back. The 5th province was colder, bleaker. The roads were worse, the villages sparse, and the people watched the carriage pass with hard, unfriendly eyes. Brenna felt the tension radiating from the guards, the way Darina kept her hand on her weapon. On the 23rd night, they reached Lord Garvan's stronghold. It was less a manor and more a fortress, all dark stone and narrow windows perched on a hill overlooking a valley. Brenna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather as they approached. Orthane was silent, his face a mask. When they stopped, he stepped out and looked up at the fortress with an expression that might have been resignation. "Stay close to the guards tonight," he said quietly. "Do not wander. Do not speak unless spoken to." "What's going on?" "Garvan is testing me. He will push every boundary he can." Orthane's gaze flicked to her. "And he will try to use you to do it." "Use me how?" "You are a sun witness. Your testimony carries legal weight. If he can discredit you or compel you to falsify the record, he weakens the accord and my authority in one stroke." Brenna's stomach tightened. "He can't compel me. The accord forbids it. That does not mean he will not try." Orthane's voice was low and fierce. "Stay close to me. I will not let him touch you." The great hall was freezing, the fire barely enough to cut the chill. Lord Garvan sat at the head of a long table, flanked by his retinue. He was older than Orthane, or looked it, at least with white hair cropped short and a face like a blade. His eyes were pale yellow, unsettling. "Orthane," he said as they entered, "how gracious of you to visit." "Lord Garvan," Orthane's tone was neutral, "I received your petition. I am here to address it." "How dutiful, and you brought your little human scribe." Garvan's gaze slid to Brenna, and she felt it like oil on her skin. "The sun witness. Tell me, girl, do you enjoy your work?" Brenna lifted her chin. "I do my duty, Lord Garvan." "Your duty? How quaint." He leaned back, smiling without warmth. "And what does your duty tell you about a king who grovels before human law, who allows himself to be chained and monitored like a dog?" "The accord is not a chain," Orthane said quietly. "It is a covenant. It is a humiliation. We are vampires, Orthane. We ruled this world before humans learned to write, and you would have us beg permission to walk in the daylight we once owned. We do not own the daylight. We never did. The accord acknowledges that reality and builds peace upon it." Garvan's smile sharpened. "Peace. Tell me, witness, has His Majesty honored the accord on this journey? No daylight travel, no breaches?" Brenna's pulse quickened. "None." "You are certain?" "I am. Because I have heard rumors, whispers of impropriety. A sun witness who grows too close to her subject, who might be persuaded to overlook small violations for the right incentive." Brenna's hands clenched. "I have recorded every sunrise and sunset. His Majesty has complied fully with the accord. If you have evidence to the contrary, present it." "Evidence?" Garvan rose, moving with predatory grace. "What I have, witness, is doubt, and doubt is a powerful thing. It spreads, it festers. A single question about your impartiality, and the entire progress is compromised. My impartiality is not in question. Isn't it?" He was close now, too close. Brenna could smell the cold coming off him, see the faint gleam of his teeth. "You travel alone with him. Day after day, Night after night, two people locked in a box. It would be so easy to lose perspective, to see him as something other than a subject of observation, to fall. Enough. Orthane's voice cut through the hall like a blade. He stepped between Brenna and Garvin, his posture rigid. You will not harass my son witness. Harass? Garvin's laugh was cold. I am merely pointing out the flaws in your precious accord. If the witness is compromised, her testimony is worthless. And if her testimony is worthless, so is your compliance. Then challenge the testimony formally. Submit a complaint to the council. But do not stand here and slander a woman doing her duty with integrity. Integrity. Garvin's eyes gleamed. Prove it. Let me question her. Privately, I will determine whether her record is sound. No. You refuse? How telling. I refuse because you have no authority over her. The son witness answers to the Accord Council, not to provincial lords with grievances. Garvin stepped back, his expression unreadable. Very well. Then let the council decide. I will file a formal challenge, and we shall see whether your little human's word holds up under scrutiny. The hall was silent. Brenna felt the weight of every eye on her. The tension coiled like a spring. Orthane turned to her. Miss Zavala, do you have anything you wish to add? She met his gaze, saw the barely concealed worry there, and straightened her spine. Only that my record is accurate, complete, and unimpeachable. I welcome any review. Garvin's smile was thin and sharp. We shall see. They left at first light, the guards tense and silent. Brenna sat in the carriage, the witness book open in her lap, her hands shaking slightly. He's going to challenge me, she said. Formally. Yes. Orthane's voice was tight. The council will summon you. They will question you, examine the record, and attempt to find any inconsistency. Will they find one? Not if your record is accurate. It is. Brenna looked up at him. But he's going to try something else. I could see it in his eyes. Orthane was silent for a long moment. Then, Garvin is dangerous. He believes vampire supremacy is the natural order, and he sees the Accord as a betrayal. If he can discredit you or me, he weakens the entire structure. Others will follow his lead. What happens if the Accord collapses? War. Humans will not tolerate unsupervised vampire rule, and vampires like Garvin will not tolerate human oversight. The treaty that has kept us from each other's throats for 170 years will dissolve, and thousands will die. Brenna's throat was dry. No pressure, then. I am sorry. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. You were chosen because you were expendable. If Garvin moves against you, the council will not protect you. You are a tool, Miss Zavala. Useful until you are not. And you? She met his gaze. If it comes down to protecting the Accord or protecting me, what will you do? He looked at her for a long, aching moment. I do not know. The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like honesty, raw and real. At least you're not lying to me, Brenna said. I have lied to many people, Miss Zavala. I will not add you to the list. They traveled in silence after that, the weight of Garvin's challenge pressing down on them both. On the 28th night, a courier met them on the road. He handed Brenna a sealed envelope bearing the council's mark. She opened it with shaking fingers and read the contents twice before looking up. They're summoning me, at the end of the circuit. I'm to present the witness book and submit to questioning under oath. Orthane nodded slowly. Expected. There's more. She scanned the letter again. Garvin has filed a secondary complaint. He's claiming you violated the Accord, that there were daylight departures, unreported contact, evidence of compulsion. Lies. I know, but he has witnesses, people willing to testify. Then they are lying as well. Can you prove that? Orthane's expression was grim. Not without your testimony. Which brings us full circle. If they discredit you, they discredit me. Brenna folded the letter carefully. What if I told the truth? Every word of it. The 6 hours, the conversations, She stopped. The what, Miss Zavala? She met his gaze. The fact that I care about you. The carriage seemed to hold its breath. You should not, Orthane said finally. Too late. If you admit that under oath, they will say you are compromised, that your record cannot be trusted. But it's true. I do care, and the record is still accurate. The council will not see it that way. Then what do you want me to do? Brenna's voice cracked. Lie! Pretend I'm some neutral machine? I'm human, Orthane. I can't spend 38 days locked in a box with someone and not feel anything, especially when that someone is... She stopped, shaking her head. When that someone is what? Good, decent, honorable. When he sits still for 6 hours because he doesn't want to wake me. When he stands between me and a predator without hesitation. When he listens like I matter. Orthane looked stricken. Brenna. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it, in his voice, broke something loose in her chest. I know this is impossible, she said. I know there are rules and politics and 100 reasons we can't. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Orthane moved. One moment he was across the bench. The next, he was beside her, his gloved hand cupping her face with aching gentleness. If things were different, he said quietly. If I were not what I am, and you were not who you are, if there were no accord, no counsel, no eyes watching, I would... He stopped, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. But things are not different, and I will not risk you for my own selfishness. It's not selfish if I want it too. You do not understand what you are saying. Then explain it to me. If we acknowledge this, whatever this is, they will use it to destroy you. Garvin will claim I compelled you, seduced you, manipulated you into falsifying the record. Your testimony will be worthless. I will be discredited, and the accord will fall. So we lie. You are a sun witness. Your entire purpose is truth. Then what do we do? Orthane closed his eyes, his hand still cradling her face. You write what you saw, exactly what you saw. No omissions, no exaggerations. You let the record speak for itself, and if they choose not to believe you, then you fall. Then I fall, but you will be honest. You will be beyond reproach, and perhaps in time the truth will be enough. Brenna felt tears prick her eyes. That's not fair. No, it is not. He opened his eyes and she saw the pain there, the longing. But it is the only way that does not destroy you. And what about you? I have survived worse. She wanted to argue, to rage against the impossible situation, but his hand was warm or cool. She couldn't tell anymore, and his eyes were silver and sad, and she knew he was right. Okay, she whispered. I'll tell the truth. Thank you. He lowered his hand and moved back to his side of the bench, the distance between them suddenly vast. The last 12 nights were agony. They spoke less, both of them carefully polite, avoiding the weight of what had been said. Brenna recorded every detail with meticulous precision, knowing her testimony would be picked apart word by word. On the 40th night, they stopped at the circuit's final destination, a town built around hot springs where steam rose from the ground and the air smelled like sulfur and minerals. It was beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way, pools of turquoise water surrounded by black rock, the whole valley glowing in the moonlight. Brenna stepped out of the carriage and stared. It's like another planet. The accord was signed here, Orthane said, joining her. Neutral ground, neither fully human nor vampire. It seemed appropriate. Is this where the hearing will be? Tomorrow night. The council is already assembled. Brenna's stomach twisted. Great. Looking forward to it. Orthane looked at her, and for a moment the mask slipped. Whatever happens, Miss Zavala, Brenna, know that I am grateful. For your honesty. For your company. For... He stopped. For what? For reminding me why the accord matters. Why rules and restraint and truth are worth the cost. He paused. And for making 40 nights in a rolling box far less of a prison than I expected. Brenna smiled despite herself. You're welcome. That night, in a small room overlooking the springs, Brenna made her final entry in the witness book. Day 40. Arrival at Valley of Springs, 9:17 p.m. His Majesty exited Carriage at 9:22 p.m. No daylight exposure. Witness confirms full compliance with the Sun Accord for the duration of the royal progress. Record complete. She stared at the page for a long time. Then on the line below, she added, Personal note. His Majesty Orthane Edevane has conducted himself with honor, integrity, and unwavering adherence to the law. Any claims to the contrary are false. She blotted the ink, closed the book, and tried to sleep. The hearing was held in a pavilion built over the largest spring, the water hissing and bubbling below the floorboards. The council sat at a long table, 7 vampires, 7 humans, all of them ancient and grim-faced. Lord Garvin sat to one side, flanked by his own retinue. Orthane stood alone on the other. Brenna was called to the center. She held the witness book like a shield. Miss Zavala, said the head councilman, a human with gray hair and steel-rimmed glasses, you have served as Sun Witness for His Majesty's progress. Please present your record. She stepped forward and laid the book on the table. The councilman opened it, scanning the pages with a critical eye. The silence stretched. Your entries are thorough, he said finally. However, Lord Garvin has raised concerns about your impartiality. My record is accurate, Brenna said. That is not in question. Your objectivity is. The councilman looked up. Did you, at any point during the progress, experience undue influence from His Majesty? No. Did he attempt to compel you, coerce you, or otherwise interfere with your duties? No. Did you engage in any conduct that might compromise your role as an impartial observer? Brenna hesitated. Across the pavilion, Orthane's gaze was steady and unreadable. Define compromise, she said. The councilman's expression sharpened. Did you engage in personal or intimate conduct with His Majesty? No. Did you develop personal feelings that might color your judgment? Brenna lifted her chin. I developed respect for His Majesty's adherence to the law and his commitment to just governance. If that compromises me, then every Sun Witness who does not actively despise their subject is compromised. A ripple of murmurs went through the pavilion. Garvin leaned forward, his smile predatory. The witness evades the question. Ask her directly, does she harbor romantic feelings for Orthane? The councilman frowned. That is not. It is entirely relevant. If she has been seduced, her testimony is worthless. Brenna's heart hammered. She looked at Orthane, saw the minute shake of his head a warning or a plea. I respect His Majesty, she said carefully. I admire his integrity. But my personal feelings do not change the facts. He departed after sunrise every day. He arrived before sunset every night. He complied fully with the accord. That is what I witnessed, and that is what I have recorded. And the incident at Waystone Inn, Garvin said, when he touched you. Brenna's blood ran cold. How do you? I have witnesses. A guard who saw him steady you by the arm. Physical contact, Miss Zavala. A clear violation. He was preventing me from falling. The rules do not provide exceptions for chivalry. The rules are designed to prevent compulsion and manipulation. A half-second of contact to stop someone from face-planting in the mud is neither. Garvin's eyes gleamed. But you did not report it. Brenna swallowed. No. Why not? Because it was irrelevant to the accord's purpose. Or because you were already compromised, already covering for him. I was exercising judgment. That's what witnesses are supposed to do. Judgment informed by objectivity, the councilman said. If you omitted one incident, how can we trust the rest of your record? Brenna felt the ground shifting beneath her. She looked at Orthane, saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched. Ask him, she said suddenly. The councilman blinked. I beg your pardon. Ask His Majesty. Under oath. Did he compel me? Did he manipulate me? Did he, at any point, attempt to influence my testimony? Garvin's expression darkened. That is a reasonable request, Orthane said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, commanding. I will answer under oath. The council exchanged glances. Finally, the councilman nodded. Very well. Your Majesty, did you, at any point during the progress, use compulsion or other vampiric influence on your son witness? No. Did you attempt to manipulate her testimony? No. Did you engage in any conduct designed to compromise her objectivity? Orthane's gaze flicked to Brenna, something unreadable in his eyes. No. I gave her no instruction, no incentive, and no threat. The record she produced is hers alone. The councilman sat back. And yet Lord Garvin claims you violated the accord, that there were daylight departures. Lord Garvin is lying, Brenna said flatly. The pavilion erupted. Garvin surged to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You dare? I dare because it's true. Brenna pulled a folded paper from her pocket. On day 19, we passed through Lord Garvin's territory. I recorded 3 carriages leaving his estate at noon. Full daylight. I noted the crests on the doors. One of them was his personal seal. She handed the paper to the councilman. He read it, his expression unreadable, and passed it to the vampire beside him. You documented Lord Garvin's movements? The councilman said slowly. I documented everything. That's my job. And while His Majesty has adhered to the accord without exception, Lord Garvin has violated it at least 3 times in the past month alone. Garvin's face was white with fury. She is fabricating. I have the witness book, dates, times, descriptions. If you want to challenge someone's compliance, councilman, perhaps start with the Lord who's actually breaking the law. The silence was deafening. The councilman looked at Garvin, then at Brenna, then at the paper in his hand. These are serious allegations, he said finally. They're also true. Check the records. Ask his household. He's been violating the accord for years and using these hearings to distract from his own crimes. Garvin lunged. He moved faster than Brenna's eyes could track, crossing the pavilion in a blur. She stumbled back, but he was already there, his hand closing around her throat. You little Orthane hit him like an avalanche. One moment Garvin was choking her, the next he was on the ground, Orthane's knee on his chest, white hair falling around his face like a curtain. Touch her again, Orthane said, his voice a cold, lethal whisper, and I will end you. Guards rushed forward, pulling Garvin up and back. He was snarling, his yellow eyes wild, but Orthane didn't move. He stood between Brenna and the vampire lord, his posture rigid and unyielding. The head councilman rose slowly. Lord Garvin, you will submit to an investigation immediately. If Miss Zavala's allegations are substantiated, you will face the full penalties of the accord. She is lying! She is his creature, his— Enough! The councilman's voice was hard. You attacked a son witness in open council. That alone is grounds for sanction. Remove him. Guards dragged Garvin out, his protests echoing across the valley. The council members were conferring in low voices, the pavilion buzzing with tension. The councilman turned back to Brenna. Miss Zavala, your testimony stands. The record is accepted as accurate. His Majesty is cleared of all charges. Brenna felt her knees weaken. Thank you. However, the councilman's gaze was sharp. The accord requires reform. If witnesses can be threatened, attacked, or coerced, the system fails. We will be drafting new protections, effective immediately. You will be consulted. I'm honored. You should be. You may have just saved the accord. He glanced at Orthane. Your Majesty, the progress is concluded. You are dismissed. Orthane inclined his head. Councilman. He turned and walked out, his coat swirling behind him. Brenna watched him go, her throat still aching from Garvin's grip, her heart pounding. Darina appeared at her side. Come on, witness. Let's get you checked out. I'm fine. You were just choked by a vampire lord. You're getting checked out. The healer pronounced her bruised but unharmed. By the time she emerged from the infirmary, the moon was high and the valley was quiet. She found Orthane standing by the edge of the largest spring, his hands clasped behind his back. You saved me, she said, joining him. I kept my word. I said I would not let him touch you. You risked your position. The council could have ruled against you for attacking him. I do not care. He turned to face her, and the moonlight turned his eyes to silver mirrors. You testified truthfully. You exposed Garvan. You saved the Accord, and he tried to kill you for it. If defending you cost me my throne, so be it. Brenna's breath caught. You don't mean that. I have never meant anything more. They stood in silence, the steam rising around them, the water glowing beneath the stars. Brenna thought about the 40 nights, the cramped carriage, the weight of the witness book, the 6 hours she'd spent asleep on his shoulder, and the way he'd sat motionless because waking her felt wrong. What happens now? She asked. The council will investigate Garvan. The Accord will be reformed. Witnesses will have real protection, real authority. You will be offered a position senior oversight, most likely. And you? I will return to the capital, resume my duties, pretend the last 40 nights were simply a progress, nothing more. Is that what they were, nothing more? Orthane looked at her, and for once the mask was gone entirely. She saw everything, the loneliness, the longing, the careful control he'd maintained for weeks. No, he said quietly. They were not. Brenna stepped closer. Then don't pretend. Brenna. The progress is over. The testimony is given. The witness book is closed. I'm not your son witness anymore. You are still human. I am still vampire, I know. But the Accord doesn't forbid relationships. Just compulsion, manipulation. And you've never. I thought about it. The confession came out raw. Every night in that carriage, watching you, knowing I could reach out, touch you, and you would. He stopped, shaking his head. I thought about it constantly and hated myself for it. I wanted you to. His eyes snapped to hers. What? Touch me, reach out, stop being so damned honorable and just. She broke off, frustrated. I've been in love with you for 3 weeks, Orthane, maybe longer. And I've watched you torture yourself over rules that don't even apply anymore. So if you're waiting for permission, here it is. I'm giving it. He stared at her. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and cupped her face in both hands. His touch was cool and gentle, and she leaned into it without thinking. If I do this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, there is no going back. You will be tied to me. Humans will distrust you. Vampires will see you as prey. Your life will be complicated, dangerous, and scrutinized. Sounds terrible. Brenna. I'm serious, it sounds awful. And I don't care. She covered his hands with hers. You sat still for 6 hours because you didn't want to wake me. You've spent 40 nights being the most decent, honorable, frustrating man I've ever met. You protected me from Garvan without hesitation. If that's the person you are when no one's watching, when there's no politics, no performance, then I want that. I want you. Orthane closed his eyes. You undo me. Good. He kissed her. It was soft, tentative, as though he expected her to pull away. But Brenna pressed closer, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, and he made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss. He tasted like cold air and something faintly metallic, and his hands were steady and sure, and Brenna felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. I love you, Orthane said, his forehead pressed to hers. I have fought it, denied it, tried to reason it away, but I love you, Brenna Zavala, and I will spend whatever time you give me proving that I am worthy of it. Brenna laughed, giddy and relieved. You're already worthy, you idiot. He smiled, full and real and devastating. Then I will spend it showing you that you were right to choose me. They stayed by the spring until dawn, talking and kissing and making plans. The council would convene again in a week. Brenna would return to the capital, take the senior oversight position, and work on the Accord reforms. Orthane would continue his rule, but with one significant change. Brenna at his side, not as a witness, but as a partner. The court will talk, he warned. Let them. There will be challenges, vampires who see you as a weakness. Then we'll handle them. Together. He looked at her, and the gratitude in his eyes made her chest ache. Together, he agreed. 6 months later, Brenna stood in the palace courtyard, watching the sun set over the city. The Accord reforms had passed unanimously. Witnesses now had legal immunity, armed protection, and the authority to investigate any vampire or human suspected of violations. Garvan had been stripped of his title and exiled, his territory absorbed into neighboring provinces, and Brenna, former clerk and expendable son witness, was now senior oversight director. She had an office, a staff, and a voice in council meetings. She also had a vampire king who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. "Are you ready?" Orthane's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She turned. He stood in the doorway, dressed in formal black, his white hair tied back. In 6 months, he'd relaxed in ways she'd never expected, smiling more, joking, letting himself be seen as something other than the stoic king. Around her, at least. Ready for what? The state dinner. 200 guests, half of them looking for any excuse to cause trouble. Brenna groaned. "Can we skip it?" "Regrettably, no, but I will make you a deal." "I'm listening." He crossed to her, pulling her close. "Endure 3 hours of tedious politics, and afterward we will steal a carriage, disappear into the countryside, and I will spend the rest of the night reminding you why you put up with me." Brenna grinned. "That's a pretty good deal." "I thought so." She kissed him, slow and sweet, and felt him relax into it. Even now, months later, there was still a sense of wonder in the way he touched her, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I love you," she said against his mouth. "I love you." He pulled back slightly, his silver eyes soft. "And I'm grateful every day that you fell asleep on my shoulder. Best decision I ever made. Technically, you were unconscious. It was not a decision. Don't ruin the moment." He laughed and kissed her again. Somewhere in the palace, a bell chimed, signaling the start of the dinner. Brenna sighed and let him lead her inside, their hands linked. The state dinner was exactly as tedious as promised, but halfway through, Orthane caught her eye across the table and mouthed, 3 hours. She bit back a smile and nodded. Afterward, they did steal a carriage, one of the smaller ones, unarmored and quiet. They drove out to the Valley of Hot Springs, where the steam rose ghostly in the moonlight, and spent the night talking and kissing and watching the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Orthane asked at one point. "Choosing this life? Never, do you? Regret you? Impossible." He laced their fingers together. "You gave me something I thought I had lost 200 years ago." "What?" "Hope, the belief that I could be more than what I was made to be. That love was not a weakness but a strength." Brenna leaned her head on his shoulder, the same shoulder she'd fallen asleep on all those months ago. "You were always strong, Orthane. You just needed someone to see it." He kissed the top of her head. "Then I am fortunate beyond measure that it was you." They stayed until dawn, wrapped in each other and the quiet, and when they finally returned to the palace, the sun was rising pink and gold over the city. Years later, when Brenna wrote her memoir, part record of the Accord reforms, part love story, she would start with a single line: "I fell asleep on the vampire king's shoulder in a carriage, and he didn't move for 6 hours. That was when I knew." The book became required reading for all son witnesses, a reminder that truth and integrity could coexist with compassion, that rules were meant to protect, not to isolate, and that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was sit still and let someone rest. Orthane read it once, cover to cover, and when he was finished, he pulled Brenna into his arms and held her without speaking. She knew what he was thinking, that 40 nights in a carriage had changed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted, and that if he had to do it again, he wouldn't change a single moment. They never had children, Brenna's choice, and one Orthane respected without question. Instead, they poured their energy into the Accord, into building a world where vampires and humans could coexist with dignity and trust. It was hard work, often thankless, but they did it together. On their 10th anniversary, Orthane surprised her with a gift, a small, armored carriage, restored and repainted, with cushioned benches and brass lanterns. "Really?" Brenna said, laughing. "I thought we might take another progress, for old time's sake." "You're nostalgic for 9 hours a day in a rolling box?" I am nostalgic for 9 hours a day with you. He held out his hand. What do you say, Miss Zavala? One more circuit? She took his hand, her heart full. One more. But this time, I'm bringing better books. And I, Orthane said, his smile warm and real, will make sure you have a proper place to sleep. They climbed into the carriage together, the door closing softly behind them, and as the horses started forward, Brenna leaned against his shoulder and closed her eyes. This time, he wrapped his arm around her without hesitation. And they rode into the night, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of places, bound by truth and trust and a love that had defied every rule meant to keep them apart. The witness book was closed. The story was just beginning.